Good evening. Tonight I'm going to be discussing, as my selected figure, Abigail Adams. Abigail Adams was a woman, some might suggest, far ahead of her time and had a number of significant contributions to her country and even the progress of her country. Some would consider Adams to be a forerunner, if you will, to the women's rights movement, as Abigail defied pretty much every convention of her day for what a woman was supposed to be or what a woman was supposed to do. Contrary to the standards of her day, Adams was a well-educated woman who loved to read. In fact, it's remarked that she had suggested that she had a fancy, in her words, for a closet with a window which I could more peculiarly call my own. And she actually was talking about her hope for a book closet to be built by John for her one day. Um, she was a woman who didn't mind to speak up for herself and even speak in contrast to the things that John might suggest or would influence. We see that she's noted to have written in a letter to John during the Revolution, actually in March 31st of 1776, who said in this letter to John that women, quote, will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation. Somewhat ironic that you consider that the whole emphasis of the American Revolution was on the fact that the colonists had no rights or representation in their laws. And this was the whole argument of Adams to her husband, was that she didn't feel as though many times that women had that kind of voice. She also divided the conventions of her day by running contrary to the way that John Adams would have done things. When he left and went to Europe, he left her in charge of the family's finances, and he had requested that she buy several adjacent farms so that they might increase their land. But instead, Abigail took off to become a bond speculator, and what she was doing was actually incredibly shrewd. She would go out and buy bonds that had been issued to Revolutionary War soldiers or even farmers in return for supplies. Been issued to them for some form of payment by the young government, and she would buy them for gold or silver at a fraction of their price and then collect interest on the full face value. In fact, one such example is found in the summer of 1777, where she bought 100 pounds worth of loan certificates in Massachusetts and paid for them with paper money that had actually depreciated to a quarter of its value. So she bought 100 pounds face value of certificates for only 25 pounds of silver. So it was quite impressive that she was so wise, so shrewd. Also, she's considered to have been sort of the early example of what the First Lady of the United States should be, even though such a title didn't exist in her day. Abigail held what was known frequently as the Republican Court. It was a gathering, a social event, if you will, at her home, which that Adams had taken over from the Washingtons. And they would there have these social events where dignitaries and politicians would be invited, and they had an opportunity to interact. And Abigail actually frequently used this as an opportunity to try and influence public perception about her husband, even getting involved with social discussions. She had actually tried to influence several newspapers with positive press for her husband, going so far even one time as to write a letter to her sister and include a copy of one of his speeches to demand, if you will, that her sister get it published locally in an area that might not have been so favorable to John. She also was benevolent to those that had needs, trying to help those that were less fortunate with some of the money she had received from her bond speculating proceeds, and also just trying to influence people positively for him and foreign dignitaries through these weekly gatherings. So Abigail was sort of the forerunner to the modern First Lady and some of the things that we think of a First Lady as doing. So Abigail had a profound impact on what the leadership of our country would turn out to be as far as First Ladies, as well as defying societal conventions of the day for what a woman was supposed to be. So for those reasons, we would consider Abigail Adams to be a very important woman.